Welcome to Bright Green Futures, episode 34, Climate Heritage with Anna Soon. I'm your host, Susan K. Quinn, and we're here to lift up stories about a more sustainable and just world and talk about the struggle to get there. Today, we're going to have a quick chat with Anna about her story, Coriander, in the new Bright Green Futures anthology, which released on Earth Day. But first, there are 3 things listeners should know. 1, the anthology is a collection of hopeful climate fiction stories from guests on the pod and is available in ebook and print. Now that it's released, you can request that your library carry it, and that super helps with making it available to people. 2, Anna's story is published separately as an ebook, and it's free right now, so make sure you go download that after the show, or just get the anthology, which has all the stories, plus a bonus prose poem. And thirdly, the giveaway will go until the end of May. Lots of cool stuff, handpicked by the authors, each item having a connection to their stories, so make sure to enter that as well. Links for all those things are in the show notes and also on the Bright Green Future Substack. All right, Anna, thank you for coming back to the pod.
Thank you for having me back, Susan. Wonderful to be back.
Oh, I'm delighted and to be in conversation with you again because we always have such interesting conversations. So I'm super looking forward to this. But let me start with saying I asked each of the authors in the anthology to pick a theme word, something that represented the story, and you picked climate heritage, which is perfect. And as a side note, as soon as I read your story, I knew it would be the perfect story to go at the end of the anthology. The story order is kind of a storytelling act itself. It kind of has a meta story that it tells simply through the theme words that each of the authors have picked. And yours, just like the theme word and the story itself, just ended on the perfect note. And that expansive word heritage has just so much built into it and really speaks to what the story covers. So why don't you read for us the one-line description of your story, and then tell us a little bit about how it speaks to heritage as a theme.
So the one-line description for my story is: a culture historian travels around the world to her great-grandmother's birthplace and discovers traces that transcend time. So in my story, Esther, who has grown up in a Western country, and we get the sense that her great-grandmother may have immigrated a long time ago, and therefore the entire sort of like the immigrant experience is in the backdrop of the story. So she travels back to the city where her great-grandmother was born and tries to connect the dots between the memory she inherited through the family and what she experiences in the present day. I guess hopefully that's a good enough summary.
Yeah, no, that's great. And, you know, the theme of notebooks as heritage, as like it is literally heritage for, or an inheritance, like those words are connected. And the memoir is, you know, belonged to, was it her great grandmother or her great great grandmother? I can't remember now off the top of my head.
When I first wrote the story, I actually wondered if there was a time and place where people would and should travel less, I guess. We see that notion of understanding what we scale back from. And particularly, like, let's say if we no longer have commercial flights, I wanted to know, like, what are the reasons someone would have to learn about other parts of the world and how we build up our knowledge around place. I want to say, like, globalization hasn't entirely been good for all of us, but in the same breath, we, in this short amount of time of civilization, we've sort of built up tolerance and understanding of other cultures that are not ours, and I think it's supremely important. So I guess, like, the backdrop to this story also for me investigates that, like, how do you not lose that richness?
Such a
Yeah.
great point too, because it's something I've been thinking a lot about lately is the juxtaposition of good things and bad things. Kind of, you know, and you encapsulate that in like the globalization, the travel, which is killing the planet in some ways, but also is enriching culture and our understanding and appreciation of one another, which is important for coexistence and ultimately for sustainable living. So, you know, having those two things coexist is emotionally difficult for us, because we're like, we want things to be all good or all bad, and we want to be able to get, very in high moral dudgeon about it, like I'm fully against this because it's all bad. And it's like, well, okay, but we need to be mindful of what we lose and how to preserve that. And I think that's, a lot of people stall out at that point, and they're like, oh, just forget it. If I can't be like morally perfect, then that's it, I'm out. I might as well just do everything terrible. And it's like, okay, that's not the answer either. The answer is, be mindful and wrestle with the difficult things, which, I mean, is so much what your character is doing in this story at a bunch of different levels. She's wrestling with difficult things for herself, for other people even. And I love that sort of richness in your story.
I actually found this story really difficult to write, particularly because I take inspiration from real places in my story. So sometimes if you pick up some clues, you can actually tell where my brain was at when I wrote a particular story, and they're real cities. And so when I write solar park stories, I have to reckon with the fact people still live there, and think about how do we transcend the challenges that are coming. So in places like these, and so this particular town city is set very much in Southeast Asia, and uh, and it's not only there that I'm thinking of, but historically humans have built our towns and cities near rivers, deltas, and other waterways for good reasons. There's a lot of resources, natural resources there, and it's a certainty that many of these places will be flooded in some form or already have been flooded in some form because where they are located relative to sea level and already coastal villages have lost land. We know that. But one of the things that was interesting to me is heritage as a movement that exists right now, and certainly in the corners where I'm exposed to, because I'm in certain discussions and groups that look at this stuff. It concerns itself with preserving relics of the past, and I think that's all and well and important, but it's so rare that I hear it discussed in terms of preserving heritage in the context of climate change. And that's also one of the backdrops that I wanted to investigate in this story. Like, how is actually a question that's been on my mind for several years. And I looked into, like, architecturally, how do you lift buildings that have been built like 300-400 years ago off the ground, and you can't do it? And so, which is why in this story I've gave it a different treatment and give it a different place, and maybe in itself it becomes a new heritage going forward. So yeah, this is the sort of stuff that bothers me. It doesn't exactly keep me awake at night, but sometimes it does.
But it's because you're actually engaged with it. You're actually grappling with the meaningfulness of it, which it comes through so great in your story. And obviously, writers who writers have to do that work first before we can put it in the stories, right? So I deeply appreciate you doing that work. Sort of like, this is just something I'm really concerned and interested in thinking about. And there's so much intersection of like climate change and X that we just don't think about. We barely think about climate change, much less the intersection of it in all these different levels. And I think, it's so funny to me how a lot of these sort of reactionary pressures we see right now, reactionary forces, are like trying to go back or trying to freeze
Yeah.
time and not go forward. And it's like, it's all changing. None of y'all can stop it. It is just like a fact. And we are living through, I was just telling this to Tori Stevens, who's in the cultural or the creative manager at Grist for Imagine 2200. We are having this really great discussion. And I said, I really believe we're going through a huge cultural change moment right now. And when you're in it, you don't really know what you're in. It's hard to see what you're losing, even as you're losing it. Sometimes it's obvious, right? Like when you're losing human rights, that's pretty obvious. But other things you may not realize until like it's kind of slipped away. And so I think this is really important work that you're doing through your storytelling of saying, hey, let's be mindful. Let's look to past things that we may have already lost or are in process of losing. And what is meaningful about those, and how do we preserve that, and what are we willing to do? What can we do? against the rising waters. Like, what can you do? There's some
Yeah.
practical limits to stuff, and deep thinking about it. This is what stories and culture does, right? It's us grappling with reality and the world and ourselves. And I just love your contribution. People, you have to go read it. Which, again, Anna's story is free this week, and I do this intentionally as this is the final story in our little spree that we're doing of podcasts about the anthology. And each week I have been setting one story free so that people can just very easily access, get a taste, see what it's like. And each of your stories are so unique, and touch an interesting different part of this larger solar punk, genre, but really like just the cultural moment. And I really encourage people to get the whole anthology for sure, but like take advantage of that free story if you're not quite sure. Just do it. Just try it out. You will not be sorry. All right. Is there anything else you wanted to tell us about this story before I get to your giveaway item, which is also extremely cool?
I think I might have to stop here because otherwise I'm going to give things away. So it's probably best not
That's so
and leave
true.
some space
It's
for
so
readers
true.
to
I
hopefully
I have
enjoy
struggled
it.
with each of these episodes to not just like go into all the things because I don't want to spoil the stories. So let's talk about the giveaway item. Okay, so yours is very cool. It's these cool notebooks. And I'm just going to read the description of the notebooks here. The gold accented paper used for the cover is from Florence, Tuscany. It depicts traditional Florentine motif. This one is called Medicia. I think I'm saying that correctly, and it is inspired by the influential Florentine family, the Medici. Did I say that right?
As Medici, but I'm not entirely
Medici.
sure.
That sounds much more Italian. So I'm going to say you're probably right on that. Okay, so this is so cool, and I think it fits wonderfully with your cultural heritage character. But there's also notebooks featured in the story itself, which is not a spoiler too much, because we kind of already said there's this memoir. Um, and I think it's required for every writer to be a little in love with notebooks, just sort of as a writerly technology. Um, but are there any special inspirations that you connected to these ones, or why these particular notebooks for your giveaway?
So won't spoil the story, but the moment that the particular notebook showed up in the story, and sometimes when you're a writer, you don't anticipate these moments and sort of influences in your own life that randomly shows up on the page, I don't know, near the end of the story. So for me, this particular reference is many, many years ago. A friend of mine who actually lived for a time in Italy, we met in Canada, of all places. Um, she gifted me some Florentine stationery, and there was this beautiful object that I did not want to use for the longest time. I only used it for special occasions. And it was of a quality that I've never encountered up to that point, and I was just so smitten by it. I guess it's one of those things I feel fortunate about having had the luck and the chance to live on different continents. You kind of have an appreciation for where things come from, the history of objects, and this notion of like local craft and specialty. And so there's a part of me that I guess mourns what we may lose going forward, like these old techniques and technologies that underpin culture, and they're really, really small things. Things like how to make paper, making glass, and certain places do it better than others. Things that make us who we are. So yeah, although obviously, like, we might not today agree with the kind of power structure that used to exist in Florence, but the Medici contributed materially to the Renaissance, which enabled thought, art, and architecture to flourish. And it was also a time where humanists believed that everybody should be able to speak or write and sort of like level the playing field in terms of education so that individuals would be capable of engaging in the community in a meaningful way in sort of the citizen and sort of the civil level of engagement, which I thought was, I didn't know that about the history, and it sort of delighted me to find out about that. So yeah, I guess there's multiple meanings for this particular giveaway, but really quite simply, it was a friend of mine who gave me this beautiful stationery and just made me appreciate that different places had different craft and heritage.
That's so lovely. And I love how, like, the simple beauty of something can sometimes just draw you in and make you think, you know what, I need to know more about what this is and where this came from and how it came to be. And I think that's also a really interesting part of solar punk as a lifestyle, or just sort of a general cultural moment of where we're sort of bringing back crafts and, like fiber arts, paper making, all these kinds of, more things that we would associate with a much earlier time in our technology as a human species are coming back because they're very grounding. They're very hands-on. People get a lot of pleasure from them. They can be very subversive to the established order. Like if you go into these communities, they often are very subversive and very solar punk aligned. And I really like that connection of like, hey, let's go back and understand where these technologies came from and pull forward the better part. We can leave all the bad stuff behind, right? And just
Yeah.
pull forward the parts that are wonderfully human and engaging and are part of the better part of us. I feel like that's what we have to do in a lot of ways. It's take the better part of us and pull it forward, because those other parts are part of how we got here. It's causing a lot of the problems. So amazing. All right. Well, I'm gonna call it quits on this, because even though I would love to go on and on about this all day, and get to our end question that I ask everyone. What are you doing in these crazy times to stay grounded and keep working for a better world? And I know you're working in lots of different arenas. And I keep asking this question for every podcast episode, and I always get like the most interesting answers because everyone has their own way. So I'm very curious to hear what you're doing these days.
I'm learning to get better at doing things for myself when I need quiet and balancing against what I can do for the world around me. So funnily enough, or maybe not so surprising, when I need a bit of quiet, I do a bit of crochet and knitting, mostly for gifts for people I love, and maybe this speaks to the heritage bug in me, because like when you learn to make things by hand, you do realize that these techniques go back a very long time. And knitting, for example, has such a fascinating history. You hear terms like the Italian bind-off technique or the German short row, and you think like once upon a time we have exchanged these techniques to help us make better garments, or whatever technical reason why we want to do things a certain way. I'm also I don't know, I'm also this in side by side, and have made it my personal goal last year to learn how to be funny. Um,
How to be funny? You
yeah,
are already funny, but go on.
I, writing humor turns out to be quite difficult. So there's a couple of my stories that have come out or coming out. That sort of like where I lean into this sort of the skill I'm trying to build up to trying to be funny. Because I think well, Coriander unfortunately is not exactly a funny story, but I want to be more intentional about it, because I think it's one of those ways of um coping with the current world we live in, that I need to learn how to use this skill. Again, it's a craft. Um,
Absolutely.
so the second half of your question, keeping working for a better world. I've actually been spending less time online intentionally and more time involved with local activism. For example, in one project where we're building up the community case for a right to river application for one of our streams. That's really hugely exciting. I'm buzzed every time I talk about this. And also separately, I'm working alongside like-minded colleagues on a community project to sort of create space for residents of a particular area to interrogate and imagine their preferred futures in a place in London. So doing quite a lot of local work, and just trying to pull myself offline and make sure that my energy goes to the right places.
Oh, that is so great. And I think very a strong impulse that we all of us have, or a lot of us have right now, of working local. And that's a way of grounding. You just sort of like get away from the crazy online stuff and go where you know you can make an impact and just be in the world. So I love hearing that. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for sharing your story with the anthology. And I'm just so excited for people to be out there and reading it. So thanks for coming back.
Thank you so much. I'm very glad that you like the story and that you chose to include it. So much appreciated for doing all the work that you do, Susan. Thank you so much.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Thanks. Thank you to Anna for joining us today. That wraps up our mini-series with each of the authors of the anthology. It's truly a pleasure and an honor to publish these writers and their stories. As I've said many times, we need 1 million of these kinds of stories out there. Stories that help us imagine a future worth fighting for. And this anthology is one of the ways I'm trying to make that happen. You can help by picking up a copy. And when you're done with it, share it with a friend. Or drop it in a little free library. Request that your local library carry it. You can also help by downloading the free Bright Green Futures zine and sharing it with your friends, especially if they're struggling in these difficult times. As always, subscribe to the podcast and the newsletter for more stories to light the way forward. Bye for now, and remember to keep imagining the possibilities.